Welcome back. Thanks for streaming us here on CBS in Chicago. I'm Irika Sargent.
And I'm Brad Edwards. Today, CDC advisory panel voted unanimously recommending Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine for children as young as 5.
The recommendation clears the path for child-sized doses to be delivered as early as Wednesday. We know you probably have a lot of questions, so we wanted to bring in someone with answers. Joining us now, University of Chicago Medicine's Chief Infectious Disease Epidemiologist, Dr. Emily Landon. Dr. Landon, thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, Dr. Landon,
Thanks for having me.
Always great to have a friendly face here, someone we've become well acquainted with throughout the pandemic. So with the announcement, parents have a lot of questions. Many of those parents, viewers at home, we asked them to send in their questions, and there were a lot of them. So let's get right to the first one. What exactly is in the child version of the vaccine? Is it just a little adult version, or explain?
It is. It's a little adult version. It's 1/3 of the adult dose. No additives, no preservatives, no adjuvants or extra things. It's exactly what's in the adult vaccine, which is the messenger RNA that codes for a spike protein, one use only. Each one only codes for one spike protein, so you can't keep making spike proteins forever. Wrapped in a little soap bubble-like membrane that allows it to get into your cells, and it's in a solution that is in the solution that it's in is similar to other medications that you may have taken. So we know that that's safe.
Okay, now this question, Dr. Landon, is from a parent about timing. Given possible side effects, when should I take my child to get vaccinated?
Tomorrow. I mean, as soon as you can get your kid in. So there are definitely going to be some side effects, just like there are with adults. These are the side effects of your immune system actually working and doing the job of making the antibodies and the immune response that you're going to need if you come into contact with COVID. And that means your arm might be sore, you might get some swollen lymph nodes. Kids sometimes had headaches, sometimes they were tired afterwards. Occasionally kids had fevers, but actually they did better with the vaccine than the adults did.
So we just went over the side effects and what people are going to be sensing. I know I got it, and I was kind of wiped out on day 2. Is there going to be similar expectations, or do we not know because we got to hit the gate and see what happens?
In the trials, when thousands of kids got this vaccine, some of them even got higher doses. The ones who got higher doses had a little bit more symptoms, but the ones who got the 10 milligram or microgram dose that all the kids are getting now did better than adults did, so they didn't feel as sick after their shot as we might have felt. And they had sort of less fever, less sore. I mean, everybody's arms kind of sore, but other than that, it's. I think you can expect your kid to maybe be tired afterwards. But other than that, it's kind of worth it. It's better than getting COVID.
Yeah.
So I was reading about how some places where they're setting up the vaccination clinics are deciding not to do them, say, at like a county fair zone. They're trying to do it somewhere else. So this question from parents is, does it matter where my child gets the vaccine, the environment in which they get it in?
No, whatever's going to make you and your kid feel most comfortable is the place where you can get it. We now know this vaccine is no different than the adult vaccine. It's just a smaller dose. So we have a lot of experience now with handling it and figuring out how to make this process of getting people vaccinated work. And so wherever is going to be the easiest for you and your kid to get it taken care of, whatever's the most convenient, is the best place to get it.
So we know there are going to be, no matter what the sample size, likely some children with some type of adverse reaction that will need a medical professional's attention. When does it cross that line? How do I know when to call the doctor and say, hey, I think my child's having a reaction, something significant, not just a sore arm?
Yeah, a couple things to say. First of all, every place that gives the vaccine has to be prepared for a potential allergic reaction, but it's important to note there were none in the trial. And the giving of this vaccine to adults, we've learned that anaphylaxis or severe allergic reaction is much less common than we initially thought it was going to be. So you should feel very confident about that going just fine. If you're worried that your kid might have a reaction, maybe you'd feel more comfortable in the pediatrician's office. After you get home, the risk of severe allergy is much, much lower because that usually happens pretty quickly after the shot is given. But if you start having anything that's really a red flag sign, chest pain, trouble breathing, difficulty staying awake, like so tired that you're not really yourself, kids that won't stop crying, babies, very high fevers or any sign of seizure activity, None of that was seen in the trial. Only a couple kids had even fevers above 101. So we didn't really see any severe outcomes like this in the trial, but you know, it could be that maybe 1 or 2 kids are going to have that. So if that's you, just go straight to an emergency room or call your pediatrician.
Okay. So across the different vaccines, doctor, we saw different percentages of effectiveness. But if we're talking about children versus adults, is the vaccine any more or less effective in children?
So it looked like in this study, it was about 90 to 91% effective in the kids that received it during the study. It's important to note that they get a much lower dose, and they've been getting it in a time when we have Delta variant. And we know that the vaccines are not as good for Delta variant as they were for sort of original COVID, but it looks like they're really, really good. 90% effective in kids is even better than what we were seeing in adults for Delta. Some of that could be how long it's been since some adults got vaccinated. Bottom line, very comparable effectiveness. Kids did great with this vaccine, and they developed really good immune responses.
Doctor, some parents have expressed concern over what I believe is something that's mainly found in younger men, but it's a heart condition, myocarditis. Myocarditis, right? Can you talk a little bit about that condition as it relates to COVID-19? Who is most susceptible, and is this age range, at least in the early sample size, have they seen any effect?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. There was a whole presentation at ACIP today specifically about this concern, and what they had to say was very reassuring for parents. First of all, myocarditis in general, or inflammation of the heart muscle, is more common in older adolescents and boys than it is in younger kids. And so in general, kids 5 to 11 are less likely to get myocarditis even when they get other viruses that can sometimes cause it. So that's reassuring. Then they looked at how often it happened in the 12 to 17-year-old group. And they found that 15 to 17 had it more frequently than 12 to 15, and there were none in the trials of kids in the 5 to 11-year-olds. They didn't find any cases. But it's important to note that this side effect is so rare that it actually happens about 1 in 2 cases in 100,000 vaccinations. That may seem like more than what you want it to be, but the other thing they told us was that those kids that had any myocarditis after the vaccine, it was very mild, and their hearts were completely back to normal within 5 days. Whereas they showed us that kids who got myocarditis when they had COVID, which was, to be honest with you, if you're a kid with COVID, the likelihood of having myocarditis is actually 2 in 100,000. 8 in 10,000, as opposed to 2 in 100,000. That's a lot more. And if you end up with MISC, it's as high as 9%, or 9 out of 100. And those kids that got myocarditis had myocarditis lasting weeks to months, and some of them weren't even back to normal yet. And so if you think about the vaccine being vaccine or COVID, then it really is pretty clear that even if your kid happens to be one of those, really, really rare 2 in 100,000 cases, they're going to be fine in a couple of days with a little bit of ibuprofen. That's a lot better than taking the risk, because those are probably the kids that would have done really badly if they had gotten COVID.
Okay, so we've reached this milestone, 5 to 11, but of course that brings us to the next step for so many other parents, me included. I have an 11-month-old. When can parents expect vaccines for children under the age of 5, doctor?
So that came up today as well. They talked about how we really need to get the youngest kids vaccinated as quickly as possible, and that is slated to be later this winter. They did not give a firm date, but it is upcoming. We're expecting to see an approval for Moderna for children, and then also for younger kids for the Pfizer vaccine later on.
Will the vaccine be mandatory in schools? Should it be mandatory in schools?
Well, I think that there's a lot of questions about vaccine mandates. I think one of the most important things that they said today was they compared how deadly COVID was for American kids before this vaccine was available compared to a lot of other diseases that we later got vaccines for. So for example, how many kids used to die of, say, chickenpox before they had a chickenpox vaccine? And COVID killed more kids in this last 18 months before the vaccine is available to them than Chickenpox did before its vaccine was available, then meningitis did before its vaccine was available, hepatitis A, rubella. And so it's really important to remember that these are life-saving medications that have been proven to be safe, that are being tracked for safety better than any of those vaccines that I have just mentioned, that we all give our children without even thinking about it. Now, whether or not that's a good idea to make it mandatory in school is going to depend on whether or not enough kids get it without a mandate. If a lot of kids get it and case rates fall and we're able to keep the infection under control and not spreading in schools without using the vaccine as a mandatory, then we shouldn't need to have a mandate. But if the disease continues to spread because not enough parents are willing to vaccinate their kids, it's not fair to have everybody else pay the price for that. And so kids want to be able to play their instruments. They need to be able to have social time. They need to be able to get back to being kids. And maybe it's possible that having a mandate is going to be one of the important ways of doing that.
So, Doctor, you just rattled off a litany of reasons why. But here we are, months and months and months and months into this thing. We're nowhere near herd immunity amongst adults. Studies show 70% of parents, 7 out of 10, will not get their child vaccinated, at least out of the gate. Are you baffled? Are you frustrated? Is this a bigger hill than you thought we'd have to climb, or kind of calibrate where you are?
There has been a concerted social media and regular media and disinformation campaign toward everyone in this country to try and get them to turn against the vaccine, both for themselves and for their kids. And that has resulted in a lot of people not really believing the truth. And that is terribly sad for me. And the only way to really combat that is to say, fine, you can choose to not get vaccinated, but then you're not going to be able to participate in stuff. And I don't think any of us want to see our kids not be able to go back to things the way that they used to be. My son was 12 when the vaccine was approved for 12-year-olds. I got him vaccinated the first day that it was available. I knew that there were cases of myocarditis. I knew that he was in the right age group for that. But I thought it's much safer if he gets myocarditis from this vaccine than if he gets myocarditis from COVID. You know, in the study, 9% of kids were already seropositive, already had evidence of having had COVID. And they did not have sufficient immunity to really protect themselves. And after getting the vaccine, they did the same as everybody else. They actually had fewer side effects, and they were way better protected after the vaccine. But those kids didn't even know that they'd had COVID before. And those are the cases that are most likely to go on to have this multi-organ system inflammatory syndrome, the MIS-C, that can be really dangerous and result in long hospitalizations. If you think this last year has been tough on kids, then there's nothing more tough than a long stay in the ICU and a protracted illness. And we just don't know which kids are going to get that and which ones aren't. The best choice for you is to get vaccinated.
Well, Dr. Emily Landon, Chief Infectious Disease Epidemiologist at U of Chicago Medicine, thank you so much for joining us. We always enjoy having these conversations with you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, go get vaccinated. One final rah. And thanks to all of you at home for streaming us here on CBSN Chicago. Thanks for all those questions you asked. You can find even more information about getting a vaccine on our website, cbschicago.com. For all of us here, I'm Brad Edwards.
And I'm Irika Sargent. We'll have more of your top stories right after the break.